Hello everybody, and we're back here in sunny Gotham City, or for those of you more prefer the accuracy, London. Well, as you can see behind me, we've got St Paul's Cathedral, and we are currently standing in St Martin le Grand, and we're going to do a quick walk around part of the old city of London. So, without further ado, let's get a bit further down this street because there's a lot of building work going on. So I'll try and get somewhere a little bit quieter, and then I'll be able to tell you about a little bit about this street. All right. This is St Martin le Grand. Now, if you had been here, medieval times, let's say from about the year 700 onwards, up at the end of the street on the left-hand side, there used to be a large monastery, and it had a school for ministers, priests, at the time. And a big church, but it was one of the biggest in the area, and it was the curfew bell for the City of London. So whenever it rang the bell in the morning, the gates to the city would get opened up, and then people would open their doors and their windows and get ready for the day. And whenever they rang a bell at night, the city gates would get closed, and that was more or less the time when people would start packing up. So I'll just say, very important status within the city, and because it was such a large establishment, it had a liberty attached to it. Now, liberties, if you watch any of my other videos, you'll know liberties were areas that were attached to some of the larger religious establishments, and if you stayed within the liberty and you'd been accused of a crime, provided it wasn't against the church or the king or queen in charge at the time, then you were safe. You couldn't be prosecuted. And this had a very big liberty, and it became known as a den. Someone at the time said it was a den of rogues, reeves, ruffians and thieves. Murderers and thieves, sorry. So it was a bit of a hideout for lots of ne'er-do-wells that would go and do crimes elsewhere and then come and hide out here. And there was a lot of jewellery that was suspect, that was being fenced around here, stuff that maybe wasn't what it was claiming to be. So much so that, let's say, false glass jewellery in later years that would be passed off as diamonds became known as St Martin's beads, because this area was so prolific in sort of forgeries of that sort. So it was also the place where the guy who was the main suspect in the princes of the Tower of London, the two princes that got murdered, the main suspect was a guy called Miles Forrest, and he was never actually prosecuted because he came here and stayed within the liberty. But he did eventually die here, and I believe poverty-stricken, almost died of starvation. But this was where he hid out under the protection of the church until he died. But he was thought to be the main suspect in the two princes' murder. Now, the other thing this place is famous for was the post office. These grand buildings here, there was more of them, and even by 1900, one of the big post office ones had been knocked down, but this was where the headquarters of the post office was. And it was on this street, on one of the post office buildings, that Marconi first did a wireless telegraph to one of the other post office buildings, and so it's got a bit of history in communications for that reason. And you can see here we've got a very old-fashioned post box. So I'm not quite, let's see, the penfold post box designed. Oh, I'll have to put my glasses on. Hold on. 1866. Uh, Unveiled by the Royal Highness, the Highnesses, Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall on September 16, 2016. But the postbox itself, as it says, from Victorian era, and that would be why there's a VR on the box. The postboxes usually have the letters relating to whoever's on the crown at the time. So, as I say, lots of grand buildings. All the noise that we're hearing behind us is because of a new building that's gone up, but obviously doesn't look as grand as this one. And when they were building this one, they had to knock down buildings that were already there, including one very fine pub. And I've got some old sort of prints that I found in a book which show both the old post office buildings and this street and this pub. It says site of the Bull and Mouth Inn, demolished in 1888. And this wasn't a small pub. When you look at the print that I'll try and make a copy of for you, if you remember the George Inn down in Borough that we looked at, that's the one with the galleried inn, and this was very similar. This was a big pub, and it was here that a lot of the horses and the sort of carriages that would go and deliver post to other areas, it was here that they used to leave from. So the Bull and Mouth Inn, and apparently that comes from an old, it was originally called the Boulogne Inn, which is French, but over time Boulogne became Bull and then it ended up with Bull and Mouth instead of, it was Boulogne Moth or something like that. And as you can see, another thing that was here was one of the grand houses, side of Northumberland House. So this was all part of like Victorian developers redoing the place. And here they had to destroy a French Protestant church in 1888. So all this, there was houses here as well, I've read. So there was all sorts of establishments that were basically knocked down to make way for this building. So, as I say, development continues. The next building up on the right hand side there, that is literally going up as we speak, so it's just sort of carrying on the tradition, but the buildings don't look as nice. Now here we have an old-fashioned police box. Now they obviously came in different styles. It says there, an original police telephone free for use of the public telephone is no longer operational. Please use nearby payphone. Well, if it's not, it would have been, people would have been able to call the police back in the day. And obviously there have been bigger ones, as in Doctor Who. And I know they're supposed to be bigger on the outside than they are on the inside, but I really don't think I'm going to fit into this one. So that's one of the styles of old police box. One thing I do know about these, I forgot to mention, apparently the policemen who would use them, Smithfield Market was nearby. Apparently policemen would use these to keep, if they bought some meat or other sort of goods they wanted to pick up and take back home, they would use this to keep it in. If you go to the City Police Museum, it tells you about that. And here we have one of the many, many fountains in London. Let me just see. Tilt up a little bit. Now, we'll see if I can read this one. It's very sort of, the writing's starting to disappear. So, James and Ryan, I think. Something Ward, late of Aldersgate and Islington, and then 1876. I think it was erected by their daughters, it says. So basically, 1870s, it's not unusual for a fountain. It's a very grand fountain. They must have had a bit of money. But London had lots of fountains, and that started from about 1850 onwards. The that was a way of trying to provide clean water for everybody after the discovery that cholera was transmitted through water, and lots of fountains were established all over London. The other thing that I should mention is, as I said, we are in St Martin le Grand. I don't know if you can see up on this street there, just there right of that arch. It says St Martin le Grand and then Aldersgate Street. And the reason it says Aldersgate is because there were a number of gateways into London over the years, but originally there were 4, and Aldersgate was one of them. And it was just based here. Samuel Pepys in the mid-1600s wrote about passing under Aldersgate and seeing the body parts being sort of sticking on spikes on top of recently executed traitors and criminals. So this was like one of the 4 ways into London, basically. If you're coming not from the river, this was one of the gateways. And as such, because it was a gateway, you had St Botolph's. Now there are several St Botolph's churches dotted around London, and they're always by the gates because St Botolph was the patron saint of travellers. These days we think of St Christopher, but St Botolph was the one as well. I don't know who took over or if they both are sort of respected in different ways. But yeah, St Botolph, patron saint of travellers. As such, the church would have a church erected by the gateway, and that way they could make more money because they build more churches and spread the faith, because people would nip in if they were going outside the city walls where it wasn't as safe. They would maybe nip in, say a prayer to a safe journey, and make a donation to the church to help them on their way. And if they had come from somewhere, and they would pop into the church and make a donation and say a prayer for a good journey. So it worked both ways. So it was also near here that John Wesley discovered Methodism, or sort of had an epiphany that led him to start that version of the church. So it says this tablet is erected to the glory of God in commemoration of the evangelical conversion of Reverend John Wesley on May 24, 1738. The site of the meeting room of the religious society was probably 28 Aldersgate Street. We know it was in Aldersgate because he wrote that that's where it happened. And then his brother, Reverend Charles Wesley, the site of the house is near St Bartholomew's Hospital, number 12, Little Britain, erected by the International Methodist Historical Union. Well, we'll be going down Little Britain, so we'll have a look. So, okay. So we're going to go into Postman's Park. Obviously this was once a churchyard, and then it got deconsecrated, I think, in the 1880s, if memory serves. Opened in I'll show you the sign. Opened in 1880, made up of the churchyards of St Leonard's, Foster Lane, and St Botolph, Aldersgate, and the graveyard of Christchurch, Newgate Street. Okay. And as it says, it's also home to the famous memorial, which we're going to have a look at. So it's called Postman's Park because you had the headquarters of the post office. This is where they would come in, have a sandwich, all that. So it became known for the local workers using it. Now, I know I showed this in one of my shorts previously, but let's just sort of mention it again. So this is the memorial that was set up by what was once a very famous artist in Britain, called George Frederick Watts. In the Victorian times, so sort of mid-1800s up to sort of 1900, he was probably the most famous and regarded artist in Britain at the time. Still has a gallery down in Surrey. I suspect, in terms of his fame, it's probably the only artist with his own dedicated gallery in the country, I would suspect. in terms of it being a big name. So in the same way that in Amsterdam you've got the Van Gogh for the Rijksmuseum, Watts has got his one down there. I believe it's in Surrey. I keep meaning to try and get down to have a look at it. He also painted the favourite picture of President Barack Obama, which was called Hope. So the memorial was to people who died while saving somebody else. And it all stemmed from a story that he read, I think, a newspaper clipping about this girl. The one that we're going to home in on, Alice Ayres. So, it says, Alice Ayres, daughter of a bricklayer's labourer who by intrepid conduct saved 3 children from a burning house in Union Street in Borough, at the cost of her own young life, April 24th, 1885. Now we saw the painting. If you look at my Borough walk, I think it was number 2 if memory serves. We actually see a painting down by Union Street, and we actually walk along Union Street. Although she doesn't have a blue plaque. So this is the thing, despite giving her life, there's no plaque to her actually where she lived. But Watts thought that people like her and others who'd sort of died saving others deserved to be remembered. So this one's from someone, John Cranmer in Cambridge, 23, a clerk in the London County Council who was drowned near Ostend while saving the life of a stranger and a foreigner, August 8th, 1901. And then, let's see, John Clinton, aged 10, who was drowned near London Bridge trying to save a companion younger than himself. So all these are handmade. The clay, the pottery is hand made, and then the wording is hand painted on. Wow. Okay. Sarah Smith, pantomime artist at Princess Theatre, died of terrible injuries received when attempting in her inflammable dress to extinguish the flames which had enveloped her companion. January 24th, 1863. So you can see there's all sorts. So unfortunately, nobody has sought fit, like not the council or anybody, has sought fit to continue with the practice. And so these ones, they haven't been added to, despite the fact there's plenty of room. Through into King Edward Street, which in medieval times was known as Stinking Lane because of the smell from the meat industry at nearby Smithfield. So it doesn't look like Stinking Lane now, does it? Very grand. And this is the modern part of St Bart's Hospital, the oldest continuous hospital in England. This has been here on site for 900 years. Obviously this is the modern bit, and it now specialises in sort of cancer and cardiac care. And in fact this is where I come to get my sleep apnea machine serviced whenever it needs it. Now the street down here is called Little Britain, and at the minute it's sort of chopped, if you see what I mean, like it ends here and then it continues across the road. In the old days it would have been sort of more of a continuous thing. Oh, police horses. Not every day you see that. So, as I say, Little Britain, and it's nothing, the Britain bit isn't to do with the name of the country, It's because this land used to belong in the sort of 1500s and beyond before to the Dukes of Brittany. And between the 1500s and 1700s, this was a huge publishing area. If you wanted a rare book or something, you would have come here. There we go. Nice horses. There's a bit of London for you. Morning. So that's the City of London Police. They still, as you can see there, do policing on horseback, as well as the more modern methods. But it's nice to see the traditional stuff still being used. That's a nice day for a ride. Right, okay, so let's nip over. And we will go round where the horses are going into the other half of Little Britain, which, as I say, huge publishing industry, sort of 15 to the 1700s. And indeed the first sort of regular newspaper, I think it was called the Daily Courier, which spawned the Fleet Street industry of newspapers, which became known worldwide. But that first paper was actually printed here in Little Britain. Oh, one other thing as you mentioned about St. Bart's while we're wandering along, it's also where Sherlock Holmes was introduced to Dr. Watson, who was a chemist at the hospital. So we're going to take a wander through here. It's obviously very modern now. Bartholomew Close, which is a big open square. And there's a couple of little bits of history related to this. So first of all, in the 1600s, the poet John Milton, who lived nearby, in fact he lived in Aldersgate Street for a time, where we were previously, he sought refuge here because he had written a piece in defence of killing King Charles I. So King Charles I was executed 1649. Then we had a period known as the Interregnum, where we basically had Oliver Cromwell as a sort of semi-dictator, and then after that, about 11 years later, around about 1660, I can't remember the exact date, but King Charles I's son, Charles II, was invited back to become king again, and some of Charles II's supporters took offence at what Milton had written about why it was justified killing the king, and I suspect he was going to get lynched, and he did a runner and managed to take refuge here in this square by all accounts. Another thing it's famous for is this is where the artist, oh, my brain's gone. Yeah, I know he was born here, and then I can't remember his name. Hold on, I'll get my book out, have a look. He was famous for his satirical drawings. So hold on, let me just remind myself. Of course, I didn't write it down. But of course, see, this is what happens. Brain goes. I will put it in text. But this, it's like your brain goes every now and again. But basically, he was very known for his satirical paintings and drawings. Ended up living up in Covent Garden. In fact, we mentioned him then when we did the Covent Garden walk, and about his fame and the sort of stuff. Used to like a lot of his self-portraits. He always had pugs in them because he was a big pug owner. But anyway, yeah, he was born here. and he did some paintings and drawings for St Bartholomew's Hospital. And the other thing that this is famous for is September 1915. It was the First World War, and London was, prone to attacks by Zeppelins. And the biggest bomb that was dropped by a Zeppelin landed here. And it was dropped by a guy called Heinrich Matthey, who by all accounts in World War I was pretty much a household name in Britain as a result, because I imagine the details must have had all over the papers. He certainly reported back to his bosses what he could see from the Zeppelin, the destruction that it caused. And it did luckily only a handful of people, not lucky for them, but considering what it could have done. It was a huge bomb, and it landed here, destroyed some buildings, and as I say, a handful of people. And that was in September 8th or 9th on 1915. Now, over here on the left-hand side, I think this is the Butcher's Livery Company. I'm just going to go and double check, but I'm pretty confident it is. The Worshipful Company of... Yeah, Butchers, yes, and that makes sense because we're near Smithfield, and Smithfield is where the meat market is. Well, I should say was. It's finishing this year if it hasn't already. There's been a meat market in Smithfield for 1,000 years, but it's now being moved on. So it's the last of the big markets. So, you had Covent Garden, you had the flower market, and Smithfield, or Spitalfields, you had like a fruit and veg, and Billingsgate, you had the fish. They've all been moved out of London just because of the amount of traffic and the congestion and everything that it causes. And obviously having the butcher's one for the meat industry close to Smithfield would have made sense. So livery companies, there's about 110 of them representing various trades and have done for nigh on 1,000 years. Some nice looking older houses there. That's Half Moon Court. I'm liking the big one with the in front of the gate, the big walkway into it. Lister House. So Lister, Joseph Lister, he was a surgeon, if I remember right. Another little side street, Bartholomew Place. That sign above it looks fairly old. And I'm guessing this looks like another, I just show what I'm saying here. You look up, it looks like another livery company sort of logo, but I'm not sure what to. I'll see if I can find out what the building is. Very nice. Got the little coat of arms and the flag. And that makes me think livery company. Okay. And then Bartholomew Close. Nice Georgian building there in the red brick. Number 43. Well, there's a novel sign above the door, not actual size. Okay, and there's a sundial above it. Unusual. And again, sort of a lot of, looks like original buildings. Again, I would say Georgian. So when you say Georgian, you're basically talking roughly 1720 to 1840 in terms of architecture. Although I would have thought the ones here with the tiling have been maybe redone in Victoria times. You know, I always, when I see tiling and like that, I do like it, but I always think Victorian in my head. But obviously behind it, you've got one of the Barbican Towers, brutalist architecture. And that's one of the three big towers at the end of the lane there. We'll continue on round. Now I believe this is the Hand and Shears. And we are coming up to Cloth Fair. So Cloth Fair, you can see up the street sign there. Yeah, there you go. So there's a cloth sign there saying Cloth Fair. And Cloth Fair gets its name from an event that was held here for 700 years, 1833 to 1133 to 1855. And it was a cloth fair. It was like it was a big fair, primarily aimed at the cloth trade, which was huge. A lot of towns, you know, sort of villages, were founded on the cloth trade. So there was a lot of money to be made, and people would bring their wares down to here, down to St. Bart's, and there was a big fair once a year. And then in 1855, due to the sheer amount of drunken debauchery that was taking place, it got cancelled by the Victorians. But the fair would last, I think it was 3 days essentially. By the Victorian times, it was going on for a couple of weeks, was, you know, endless drinking and wenching, and that's why they cancelled it. But I'll just show you the front of the pub. Yeah, so the Hand and Shears. The fair would be officially announced outside this pub. It says it's 1532. I would imagine there might have been a different one before here, but certainly by then this is where they used to do the official announcements saying the fair had started. But apparently, you know, as things got a bit more out of hand, a lot of people that had come down for the fair used to go in, you know, get drunk in the days before, and apparently many's a tailor, when they had a few too many, would be seen coming out with their sort of shears that they did the tailoring with. You can see in the picture, and they would come out waving them above their head late at night, shouting, "Let the proceedings begin," obviously hoping to be the first one to announce it. But yeah, that's the Hand and Shears. Apparently also known as the Fist and Clipper for the locals. It seems to be what's happening. Looks like a modelling shoot. Okay, wasn't expecting that. And here we have Bartholomew Passage, just up the back of the church, because this is St. Bartholomew the Great. Well, this is one of the older churches in London, and for my value, for my money, one of the best. And it dates from about 1123. But we'll talk about that more in the next video. But what I will give a quick mention to is just up on the other side of what's going on here. So the other thing I was going to mention is this house. And this house, would you believe it, actually has a book all about it. And do you know why? I'll just tilt up. It's because this is the oldest house in London. I believe it was a merchant's house in the 1600s, so it predates the fire of London, survived all that, and now it's a sort of private residential place. But yes, there is a book. I think it's Fiona Rule, but don't quote me. The oldest house in London tells you the story about it, and different people that have lived in it, and the story of the area. And I'll just take a quick look in here, because this is where John Betjeman, the poet, in fact, as it says, our Poet Laureate, this is where he lived. I think he moved here in the 1950s, and he raved about it and having the medieval sort of street layout and how quiet it was, and he really enjoyed it. And then he moved out, I think it was 1977, because he was tired of all the noise from the, probably the smell too, from Smithfield Meat Market. He got a bit sick of all the traffic, and he moved out. But that's where he lived. I'm just looking, there's a painting up there, which is odd. So, outside the house. I don't know how well it's going to show, if it's going to be too much of a reflection. I'm guessing this is something to do with a famous poem of his, but I honestly don't know. I'll see if I can find out. What unusual. And then I know that that's number 43. If we can find numbers 41 and 42, I know they predate the Great Fire as well. Maybe they're out on the main street, but let's just be nosy. Sometimes this is how you discover things. You just go and be nosy. There you go. Nice old-fashioned lamp there. Apart from that, not much else to see. I'll just see if I can see 41 or 42. Or 44. So you would think. It must be the green one there. So those make sense, all three of them. The one with the green bottom, there's two doorways, and this, the old house, all survived the Great Fire. So, there we have it. So I'm just going to spin round this way, and we'll finish off here. Come on. There we go. Alright, so that's us for today. We've done part of the old sort of churches, well, it's been mostly churches and stuff, hasn't it? Well, there'll be more of that. There's also a bit about executions next. So, yeah, if you come on my tour, we do this walk and a few other bits besides. So it's the one relating to churches and executions, and as I say, we'll come to that bit of it in the next walk. Alright, but thanks for watching today. Feel free to subscribe, or come on a walk with me, or come on a plot with me. Alright, so thanks very much for watching. Bye.